We always want more.
All right, guys, welcome back. Night 3 of Science of Diving. This will be the last night, unless you would like more. We're welcome to go back, do reviews, do expounding on any subject, and really dig into it. As I mentioned a little earlier, I think this class could be literally a semester-long class. There's just a lot to it, and we do it in a very short amount of time. But it's a big subject, right? So as we kind of go through that, we've talked a lot. We've gone through some gas theory. We've talked about all our favorite guys: Gay Lussick, Charles Boyle, Dalton. We know them all. They're all our best friends. They're just as good as Jim, Jack, and Jose, right? Maybe not. But tonight we're going to kind of jump in a little bit to the different pieces that we use for diving, and we're going to start talking. We're going to talk a little bit about dive computers, different types of setups we can get into. How to set those up and their benefits as well. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Window. We're going to start with dive computers. We all love dive computers. We don't like the price. But the history of dive computers is actually pretty interesting. So in the 60s, computers were starting to come along, and we're starting to get the idea that, multiple processing computers. And the Navy said, hey, we need a dive computer. And but the problem was the technology wasn't there. And the reason they wanted a dive computer is they wanted something they could give their tactical divers so that they would be safe, get more time underwater, but not come up and they'd have to and be hurt, right? So one of the few times the military actually said we want to be kind to our people, right? So in the 70s, the technology finally came along well enough where they could make dive computers, where they were able to monitor the diver's depth, time, and nitrogen load based on an algorithm. And they were actually classified top secret by the Navy because they didn't want our adversaries to be able to do the same thing. The intended use of them is really very simple. It's designed to replace your watch, your depth gauge, and create an algorithm based upon your depth and time to monitor your nitrogen load, how much the perceived nitrogen is. That's really what it is. It's just a fancy abacus, if we really want to put a fine point on it, that does a little bit of math based upon the time and depth. That's all it really does. Now, we've added a lot of really cool stuff to them as well. They will monitor your ascent rates, which is great. It'll monitor your stop, where your stop's going to be at. It'll tell you what you can hook it into your tank. It'll tell you the water temperature. That's the great part of it. It's a really great information center. But again, like we kind of talked about last night, there's only a couple of things that really apply to you against the algorithm. And those things are absolutely only really depth and time. Now, most of the computers have gotten a little fancier, and they have a barometric pressure gauge within them as well for the surface. And they're able to pop in and say, okay, you're at this altitude, and we'll go ahead and work that against the algorithm. But literally in the last 15 years, that's really the only addition that works against the algorithm that has been added to the dive computer. So as we can still say, we're still using a very rudimentary computer. I mean, this is not much faster, not much more complicated than a Commodore 64, truthfully, in what it can do and how it's processing. It's just a little smaller. So as we look at this is the Sunto Black. And it's got a few pieces of information. This is an old photo. I will change this out at some point. But it gives us how much battery time we have, what time it is, what our depth is, our dive time. It gives us a nice graph of how much gas we have. This one's set in bar, obviously. This one's set up in trimix. That's what that 1845 means. It means it's 18% oxygen, 45% helium. So it's able to give a basic idea of gas and work that against your algorithm. It's 21 degrees Celsius on this as well. So the limitations of these really become that they're set to the least common denominator, but they don't take into account, again, things like heart rate, the temperature, your temperature, or the temperature of the water. Those things aren't calculated in. And that's really one of those things. It doesn't calculate in if you're tired. One of the things I do like about the new Garmin Mark III that I wear, it gives me a dive readiness score based upon every morning based upon how well I slept that night. But that is just more of a sanity score of, hey, you didn't sleep good last night. You might not want to go diving today, but it doesn't do anything to the algorithm. Say, okay, you didn't sleep good last night, so let's make your NDL just a little shorter. Let's shorten up your or slow up your ascent and let's increase your safety stop. It doesn't do any of that. It just gives you a sanity score in the morning. So it definitely has some key limitations that are key to be aware of. The other interesting thing about working with the dive computers is that they're really designed to be able to calculate out and give you all that information on a multi-level dive. And what we mean by a multi-level dive is we go down to our deepest point, we start ascending up overall. Now, as you look at these two dive profiles, and really they would come out about the same overall. This is based, but this one gives you, the computer is able to give you credit for the time you don't spend at the deepest point of your dive and works off an average depth instead. So it's really nice to do. The challenge with it is that we need to be really aware of and very cognizant of is we can absolutely break the algorithm. It's a pretty easy deal to break the algorithm, and that's it's not designed to go backwards. What I mean by that is as we look at this algorithm, the algorithm is very much designed to go in a forward motion. Deepest point first, shallow up. Next dive, a little shallower, coming up shallower. Third dive, the shallowest of our three dives, and up. Now we can absolutely break the computer because it doesn't have a great way to monitor this. If you start out a 60-foot dive on dive one, and then you go to an 80, 90-foot dive, and then you go to a 130-foot dive. The problem is the algorithm is not designed to work in reverse. It won't it's not like a common math problem in common core math that says, 3 plus 2 is 5. 2 plus 3 is 5. It doesn't work that way, unfortunately. It's a much more complicated algorithm. So it's highly recommended that as you do these, that you use them as their intended use, right? If the box says, do it this way, just do it that way, right? Do your deepest dive first. And then if you are going to do another deep dive that's deeper than that, do it the next day, right? Simple enough. So that's one of the big things we have to certainly take into account overall. Now,
question.
Yes, sir.
I feel like I know the answer, but so in case of like on dive one, there's been times that we'll dive and then say, for example, say that we'll go to 60 feet and then we have to go up over a shelf that's 40 feet and then we go back down to 55 feet. There's nothing wrong with that if you're going over a shelf on.
No, start your deepest dive first, and you can certainly go up and then come back down. It's not like you have to go to your deepest point and stay there, right? And then if you go to 60 feet, you come up to 50 feet, you can't ever go back to 60 feet, right? As long as you use common sense, right? We're going down to 60 feet, we're coming up to 50 feet, we're going back down to 60 feet. We didn't stay at 50 feet for 20, 30 minutes, right? And then go back down, because things like that will absolutely hurt the algorithm. But short periods of time, absolutely. It's kind of like we talked about yesterday with the safety stop.
Well, that was what I was curious. Like you were saying that it will mess up the algorithm. Say that example was that you were like you started in on a spot in the ocean that was like you dropped in a hole that you weren't supposed to, and you were like, well, this isn't the 80-foot hole. It's only 65, but then you go over a ridge and then go down to 80, but you weren't there long and you went up and back down. Would that cause a problem with the algorithm?
It can if you stay up long enough, right? The idea is with the algorithm that as long as you're not staying up for more than a minute or two or three or four, in that it gives it's not adjusting the nitrogen load in such a way that it becomes problematic. For example, we talked about the safety stop that I'm doing a 20-foot safety stop, and all of a sudden I pop to the surface. If I've been on the surface for less than a minute, can I pop back down and complete my safety stop? Absolutely, right? I can pop back down 10, 15, 20 feet. 20 feet is definitely on the outside of that. In deco stops, it's the same thing. If I have a deco stop that's 40 feet, I miss that 40 feet, I hit 30 feet, can I go back down to the 40 feet? Yes, as long as it's less than 10 feet and less than a minute of time at the higher stop, you can absolutely go back down and you just extend that deco stop by another minute. Same thing with a safety stop. If I blow a safety stop, I return to the safety stop 15 feet, and I go ahead and add a minute or two just to make sure that I've given my body the time correctly to off gas that nitrogen load. But absolutely, it's a very valid question. That's good thought. And like I said, as long as you're not going down to 100 feet, coming up to 50 feet, and then going back down to 100 feet, you spending 20 minutes at 50 feet. You really shouldn't continue your down. But if you're at 60 foot, you come up to 50 foot and then drop back down. As long as it's not a long period of time, be conservative, right? And certainly use a little bit of common sense with that as well, that we're not overdoing things. Make sense?
No, that's good. I just wanted to validate if that was right or wrong. So
Oh, that's yeah, you're right on the right path, and I'm glad I like to see you thinking. That's the number one thing I want out of this class, is for me to give you concepts and for you to contemplate, think about, and figure out how this is applied to me. The other thing that we talk about as well is flying after diving. And so one of the cool things a lot of new computers do is they do have a desat rate. That's your desaturation rate, and they'll have a no fly timer on it. Several of my computers have this. And for a small dive, the desat rate may only be 12 hours. It may be less than that. Maybe it's 6 hours if it's a really small dive, right? They're able to measure that. The DAN recommendation on that is 24 hours. So if you've gone for a dive, wait for 24 hours. It's just good, safe diving. Safe diving is good diving, right? So take that into account. If you've done a really big week of diving and there've been really big dives, and that last day was a really, oh, we did a 120-foot dive, and then we did a 100-foot dive, then we did a 90-foot dive, and then we did an 80-foot dive. A lot of diving. It's not a bad idea to wait 36 hours. With the type of diving that I do, we always wait 36 hours after our last big dive. So if we're doing a 175-foot dive, Nikki and I, on a Friday, we generally won't fly out until Sunday to make sure we've completely off-gassed. But we're also going into a lot deeper profile of nitrogen load as well. So just be aware of that. It's like I said, safe diving is good diving. It's just a good way to do that. The other key piece of diving, and you have your own equipment at this point, so you're starting to really get that idea, is comfort and training, right? And making sure that I'm putting my stuff where I know where it's at. It's comfortable for me. I was reading a Dan story the other day. This woman came up from a dive, and she said she had tightness in her chest and bruising under her arm, and that she had a little bit of trouble breathing. Immediately, they thought DCS, right? So the Divemaster immediately started an exam, got her out of her gear, and noticed that her left breast was bruised. So rather than throw her on oxygen, he started doing some investigation and said, "Hey, can we see your gear?" Well, she was a hefty woman of girth, and she was wearing an extra small BC. So it squeezed a lot of skin into a little bitty BC and tightened it down. So it became an equipment issue, right? Enough that it became painful and bruised, right? So we want to think about that and look at that and make sure that our gear is comfortable and it's fit well to us. That we know where everything's going to be. The other key portion of that is anytime we do something different, we add equipment to our gear setup, it's not a bad idea to take that to the pool and try it out. Figure out, does this work in the position that I have it? I do that all the time with the gear. I'm restringing new deco bottles, so I'm going to for much larger and different position deco bottles. So I'm adding tanks number 3, 4, and 5 to my setup, and so I took them over to the pool before I decided let's go out into the lake and do this big dive. Let's see if it floats. It floats sometimes, and so take it in the gear. Whenever I get a new computer, one of the things I like to do is take it in the pool and play with it and see how it acts and interacts and reacts. At the worst case scenario, I always wear 2 computers anyway. So if I don't have that chance to go in the pool, I still have my primary computer, and I use that as either a second or a third computer, so I can get an idea. What does it look like? How does it act? How does it react? What do I need to expect? The last thing you want to do is take a brand new computer into the water and not know how to figure out the basic information. And that happened. I had somebody move up into a new Perdix. And unbeknownst to me, he went from a DSX to a Perdix, or not a DSX, a Mark II to a Perdix. And I thought he'd had this Perdix the whole time. We go out the dive, and I asked him, how much deco do you have? What's your deco? And he said 0. And I was like, no, I know that's not correct. Based on this profile, you should have 5 minutes of deco. And so finally, I called him over and looked at his computer. I'm like, there's your deco. There, it's right there. And I put it, it's like, oh, okay. And it says, look, what's your other watch say? And he looked at his other watch and said, oh yeah, 5 minutes of deco. So I was like, okay, here you go. So first time out on a dive, probably not the best time to figure stuff out. Now, as we kind of start setting this gear up, things we want to, as we diving along, the biggest thing I can tell you about all of this is just like this class, and like I've tried to make this class, we want to think simplicity. Simpler you do things, the better off you're going to be. One of my favorite things to do in deep dive class is when I get somebody to over 100 feet, I like to pull out a set of math problems. And I've got 8 math problems that I have them do on the surface. They're all like 1 plus 4, 2 plus 6, 3 plus 2. And I have them give it to me in dive signals, 2 plus 5. It's going to be 7. 3 plus 5, 8, right? It's simple enough. And usually the average diver can do these 8 math, first grade math problems in about 15 seconds. The cool thing is we get to 100 feet. I've yet to have somebody do it in under a minute. Usually it's about a minute, minute and a half to figure out the same math problem. The idea is as we start getting under pressure with cold or dark, there's a lot of things that happen, and there's a lot going in, a lot more gears turning at depth than we realize are turning. And the problem is they're taking that bandwidth away from what we're doing. So as we set up our gear, we need to make sure it's simple to the fact that it's easy to reach. My knife is right. I keep on my side mount rig, I keep a knife dead center so I can reach it with either knife. I also keep a knife right on my wrist as well as part of my computer package. So I could get to that one very easily. And that one's actually been extremely handy. I've used it twice for emergencies. It's just super easy. I keep a knife over here as well. I keep a flashlight in each pocket, and I keep a flashlight on my wrist. So I keep it simple so I don't have to think about it. What ends up happening, you get down there, and instead these gears are turning extra hard, and the bandwidth just goes away. It's like going back to dial-up internet instead of having broadband. So be aware that simplicity is definitely going to be a key thing. The other key thing you want to think about as you're starting to create these dives is consistency, right? I need to make sure I'm putting my gear in the same place every single time. Have a picture. There's Nikki on the Lady Luck in front of the 6 foot, 5 foot seahorse. And you can see we're pretty straightforward on things. She's giving me a joke pose over here, but you can see very clearly she's got a SMB and a reel right off her left-hand side, easy to reach, and then a computer on each wrist and a light right here. But nothing's dangling, hanging, drooping around. It's all easy to find, very quick. You can't see it, but she has a knife right here. Right here as well. So it's very clean and easy for her to work with. And that's what we're looking for. Is we want to make sure that whatever we do, we consistently put our stuff in the same place. I can tell you on my dry suit setup, in my right hand pocket, that's where I keep my SMB, my reel, a cutting device, as well as a spare light. In my left pocket, I keep a 250-pound lift bag and a spare mask, a cutting device, as well as another spare torch of some kind. Every single time. Nikki knows that. That's how I've got my setup done. I've always done it my setup that way, right? Simple enough. I keep a knife in the center of my chest. I keep a knife on my wrist as well. So we do it the same way every single time, so we don't have to think about it. We get comfort through repetition. One of the things we want to think about is the adaptability of what we're doing. Are we carrying the right gear for the right situation? If I'm getting ready to do a wreck penetration, I might not want to carry a 250-pound lift bag. That may not be the best solution. We want to think about what I'm using that gear for and its adaptability for the situation. Other things we can think about is, have you ever thought if I lost all the ability to hold gas in my BC, what else could I use for a flotation device? What do you guys think?
Things we can use on us for a flotation device?
If I couldn't keep any gas, I got a big tear in my BC. What's something I generally carry that I could use as a flotation device to help me keep above water?
SMB? Absolutely.
3 cubic feet of air. Absolutely going to help keep you above the surface. Wetsuit is another great idea as well. So think about, I've got gear. How else could I use it? One of the things that you'll see Nikki and I don't do is we never attach our SMB to our reel. So we can use the reel for something else if we need it. Right? If we were getting ready to do a penetration, I can pull the reel off. I can spin that reel down to penetrate a wreck. Or whatever else I might need. Maybe I'm going to make a spear and kill a giant octopus. I don't know. Whatever that is. Just kidding. I haven't killed any giant octopuses yet. I like octopus. So as we kind of go through that, the last piece of it, we want to make sure that it's reliable. It's good gear. One of the things that I tend to be really good at is about every 2 or 3 weeks, I pull, and we dive a lot. We dive every week. But I'll pull my gear in and I'll put my regulators on a tank and I'll go ahead and check them. Make sure the O-rings are good. Make sure that it's not bleeding off, that there's not something I should be aware of, that all my levers work, that my everything works the way I want it to work. So I check it on a regular basis. I check my, in fact, I just happened to have, I pulled this off about 3 weeks ago because there's a leak right here. And when I spritzed it, I could tell there's a leak. I got to figure that out. But now it's sitting in my office and it's been replaced. But the only way I would have found that out before the dive is to check it. So check your gear, make sure it's reliable. And then redundancy is a big deal. You might ask is, wait a minute, Benjamin, you said you had 2 computers. Yes, I have 2 computers. But a lot of my gear, I'll also have a backup SPG, especially if it's back mount. So we've got an extra way to tell what the amount of gas is, especially on twin sets. I've got 2 different ways to tell gas on a set of twin sets. And we'll kind of go through the reason for that in a moment. But it gives you an idea. And then finally, redundancy. You'll notice that we carry 2 computers and multiple lights. Excuse me. I've had a light go out at 108 feet and deeper and in the pitch black. It's definitely nice to have a redundant idea, right? I've lost an SMD. Fun story for you for the day. One of the very first technical dives that Nikki and I were doing, we're slinging twin sets, big steel tanks on our back, and we had these big deco bottles on our side. And we were doing a pretty heavy drift dive, and we're 150 feet in this heavy drift. Well, before we jump off the boat, the instructor comes over and he says, hey, you know what I'd like to do is I take my extra SMB and I attach it to my deco bottle. He says, that way it's easy to get to and it's not a big deal. And I thought, that's an interesting idea. I'll try that. Bad idea, by the way. Don't try things on the boat for a dive for the first time. Try it somewhere else, right? That was my mistake. But we jump in, and I had 2 SMBs like I was supposed to. I had 2 reels like I was supposed to. 3 lights. We jump in. We're 150 feet. This heavy drift. I pull off. We have to do a deco tank switch. So what ends up happening is the instructor looked over as U2 switch deco bottles. We're like, okay. So I pull mine off. I hand it to Nikki. Nikki hands me her. I clip mine back off. All's fine and well with everything. Well, we started getting to the point where it's time to go ahead and launch an SMB. And so I reach over, I grab my SMB, no big deal. I hook it on, spit it out, get it all floated up. And all of a sudden, we're in a pretty heavy current at this point at 150 feet. And something happened. And I had my finger in this finger spool and it got caught. And I couldn't get my finger out and it got knotted up and it was starting to pull me up and away from the group. So it pulled me about 50 feet ahead of the group and about 40 feet up. So about 110 feet, really fast. And it was still going. So what I did is I pulled my knife, cut that bad boy off, tied up my reel, put it back in my pocket, no big deal. But the problem is the current split. So Nikki and the instructor went this way. I kept going this way. And I was 40 feet above them as well. So there was no swimming back to them. So I'm out by myself in the middle of the ocean. I thought, all right, no big deal. I'll just go ahead and launch my other SMB because we're on a heavy drift. We got to launch SMB. Reach down to find my spare SMB. Nikki's got it. We hadn't changed back our deco bottles.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, this is bad. Because I knew I had about 40 minutes of deco that I needed to do to stage up. And I had no way for the boat to know where I was at. And the current had split. And the current was going about 2.5 knots an hour. So in 30 to 40 minutes, I was going to be about a mile this way. They were going to be about a mile that way. I wasn't looking forward to that. So luckily, very luckily, by some happen chance of whatever, I happened to come across another diver that was actually from our boat that was on a rebreather. And so I called him over and I told him, I says, I need to run my deco. And he's like, okay, run your deco. And he said, and then he looked at me, he says, you need to launch your SMB. And I says, no SMB. He's like, what? I says, no SMB. And he's like, oh, okay. So he launched his SMB and then stayed with me the whole deco time. So it really worked out well in my favor, but it could have been ugly. We were about 10 miles offshore, so I wasn't looking forward to a 10-mile swim, especially not with twin sets and a deco bottle. I think the deco bottle would have come back with me or the twin sets. So be aware redundancy is definitely to your advantage. Try things for the first time at a pool. It's to your advantage to make sure that you're doing those things.
I mean, you could raft out of your bottles, except for they would have been negatively buoyant.
Yeah. Well, the problem is I was strapped to twin sets with a metal backplate, so I had to take the whole backplate and wing off and just dropped it. That's the only thing I could have done. It was definitely, which brings us really. So, what are doubles, twin sets, and even side mounts? So, there's a couple different ways to dive, and there's basically three main ways to dive, and then there's a very eclectic way to dive called CCR. We're not going to get into CCR at all in this class, but there's doubles uh, or twin sets. I call them twin sets because nobody in the US calls them twin sets. They call them doubles here, but everybody in Europe calls them twin sets, and nobody calls them doubles. So it feels more very British of me to call them twin sets, in case you ever wondered. So the advantage to twin sets is, this is a picture with me, so twin sets on, is it's two tanks connected on a band through your BC onto a metal plate, and the two tanks are connected with a manifold. In the middle of the manifold, you're able to separate the tanks into two individual tanks. So you have two first stages and two second stages. So there's a first stage and a second stage coming off each tank, and the tanks are connected so that they act as one. So if something were to happen to my primary regulator, and all of a sudden it went to free flow, I could reach back, I could isolate it out, and then turn that tank off and breathe off the other regulator. So it gives me an ability to work as if I've got two tanks without ever having to switch. But if there's an emergency, I've got redundancy, because the chances of both tanks going out simultaneously is pretty thin overall. The disadvantage to twin sets is they are freaking heavy. You think one tank's heavy, try two with the extra crap. That's the biggest disadvantage to them. The other disadvantage to running twin sets as well is that you have to understand them. And I like to say, when I train a twin set diver, is that I'm not, they're not, if they have problems, they are not, they're problems that they had with single tanks. Twin sets don't create new problems. What they do is they reveal problems that you already had, you just didn't realize you had. If you've ever ridden a little moped versus a very big motorcycle, it's very much the same analogy. With the moped, you can throw that thing all over the place, right? But Adam, like your daughter, right, in Stress and Rescue, I grabbed her and manhandled her like a rag doll. But if Megan was in Stress and Rescue, she'd grab me and manhandle me like a rag doll, throw me around like I was nothing, right? That's what Clint did in that class, right? So with twin sets and with single tank, you need to learn, and this is kind of some pro tip for you, is that the idea is with diving, you should become two entities that happen to occupy similar space, and you're working together. You coax it along and you move with it instead of throwing it around. With a single tank, you can throw it around, but you shouldn't. It causes more effort. When you get to the point where your buoyancy compensator, your tank, is working as one and you're working as one, you happen to be at the same place at the same time, and you're working that together, your life is a lot easier. Because when you go to twin sets, all of a sudden you have twice as much weight up there, and you can't just throw it around. It doesn't work that way. So if you learn to work in cooperation with it, it works really great. It's not a problem at all, and you can get great trim, very comfortable. It makes it easier to get off a boat sometimes. Going through a tide is a lot easier in twin sets. There's advantages, but again, the big disadvantage is two big old heavy tanks on your back that will definitely, it'll let you know who's boss. That is for sure. The other type of diving that I do is called side mount diving. Side mount diving is really neat in that trim is extremely easy. It's more like akin to laying on your floor. It's hard to be out of trim in side mount. You have two tanks. They're each one independent. They're not tied together at all. The disadvantage with side mount is it's a little bit more wieldy in gear. You've got two separate tanks on your sides, so it's harder to get in at a tide. It can be a little harder if you're not experienced to get in off a boat as well. The advantage of it is a lot lighter. There's no weight on your back. It's easier to take a tank off if you need to squeeze through something. And both air sources are completely independent of the other. If something happened and one of your tanks were to go into full free flow, you just reach over and just turn that tank off. And even better is you can reach down and you can do what's called feathering. And what feathering means is I can reach down with that tank. I can find the valve. I can leave the regulator in my mouth. I can turn it completely off, breathe all the gas out of the hose, and then kick it on for about a half a second to kick it back on. It'll refill that hose, and I can breathe that off. So I can keep feathering everything until I run out of gas on that tank. It's completely independent. It gives me a few extra options. I'm less likely to have a free flow or a problem or a bubbler on a unit because I can see them. They're right there. They're right there. Very simple, very easy diving. It's my preferred method, but again, it's a little more difficult to dive getting off a boat if you don't know what you're doing. Once you kind of get the idea, it's not that big a deal. Another thing that divers carry is a deco or a stage bottle. We're going to get to pony bottles in a minute. Megan, what do you think the difference between a deco bottle and a stage bottle is?
A deco bottle is specifically for your deco stop.
Yes. Okay.
And a stage bottle, I'm not sure.
It's a common misconception. So the difference between a deco bottle and a stage bottle, they have a lot of the same characteristics. They're both for decompression. They're extra gas. They can do accelerated decompression. A deco bottle always stays with you. A stage bottle is one that I'm going to carry with me to a certain point. I'm going to clip it off to something, and I'm going to leave it there so I'm lighter throughout a dive. For example, cave diving or wreck penetration. A lot of times, if I'm going to do a wreck penetration and I'm carrying 4 tanks, I'll take my 2 deco bottles, I'll clip them off to the entrance, I'll run a line straight from where I've clipped those off, and I'll line myself into the wreck. And that way I don't have 4 bottles trying to get through small spaces that can cause problems. And then what ends up happening is I can reel my whale back out of it. When I come back to the entrance, I can grab those deco bottles, start heading to my exit, and get the heck out. So a deco bottle is always with me. A stage bottle is one that I drop or prepare to drop. So Adam, what do you think the difference between a deco or stage bottle is and a pony bottle?
From a pony bottle?
Yep.
The pony bottle is, for instance, like you were talking, that you can do off gassing, like 100% oxygen or 50% oxygen when you're doing your safety stop.
Okay. You certainly could do that, but that'd be more of a deco bottle, right? The idea with a pony bottle is a backup or redundant emergency bottle. If you go into your pony bottle, typically that means there's been an emergency. There's a couple different ways to sling a pony bottle. This on the left-hand side, let's see, sorry, you guys can't see my screen. This on the left-hand side is my absolute positively least favorite way to do this. It throws your buoyancy off, and you cannot see the bottle in case of emergency. Slinging a bottle under your left arm that you can see prevents a lot of issues. But again, with a pony bottle, you're carrying it in case something happens. It's almost like an SMB. You know, the only time you're going to use it is at the end of the dive. But in the case of a pony bottle, hopefully you're not using it. You're carrying it just in case something does happen. A diver runs out of gas, you run out of gas, something happens. So that's kind of the difference. So a deco bottle is for decompression stops. I'm going to definitely use it. A stage bottle is used for decompression stops. I'm definitely going to use it. But I have the ability to clip it off, and my weighting doesn't depend upon that bottle. And a pony bottle is only for emergencies if something were to happen and I run out of gas or whatever happens on that.
Makes sense.
Easy enough. So the next piece of that of our equipment that I like to talk about is the delivery system. And there's a lot of different pieces of delivery system out there as well. Overall, this is, I said I don't use the yellow version, but my wife and I use the Apex MTXR. We definitely like it. Available at your local dive prior. So just kidding. It is available, and they're great setups. They are the military version for cold water diving. But there's a couple different types of regulators out there, first stages out there. The first part of that is the first stage. And you either can have a piston style or a diaphragmatic style regulator. Now, the advantage to having a diaphragmatic regulator is that it's a lot better when it comes to cold water diving. It's generally a little easier to work with, a little easier to rebuild. It's a little, and it's just a cleaner setup overall when it comes to that kind of stuff. Piston regulators, it's exactly what you think. There's a metal piston in there, open, close, open, close, open, close. They don't have to be serviced nearly as often. They definitely cost more, but they're a lot less durable when it comes to cold water diving. They tend to freeze up more easily. Now, interestingly enough, I was talking to a friend at Dive Alaska, and he says, you know, that's what you generally think, but here in Alaska, we prefer to dive with piston regulators. And I said, wait a minute, hold on there, Fred. You're not supposed to dive with a piston regulator in cold. He says, well, here's the thing. We call dives at 40 degrees below zero. So we're doing a lot of our dives where the air temperature is more like 10 to 20 below zero, and our water temperature is always 33, 32, 31 degrees. He says, I don't care what regulator it is, it's going to freeze up. He says, we like the piston regulators because we can put them back in the water, and they thaw out faster than the diaphragm regulators. So there is an exception to every rule. But that's the biggest differences overall. I tend to prefer the diaphragmatic regulators. In my opinion, they breathe better, and they hold up better in cold conditions for what I do. The other piece of this as well is balanced second stages. And that's one of the huge pieces that's really come along a long way over the last 10 years is how things are balanced in the balanced technology. As what it ends up happening is as we get deeper, it allows more gas to flow more easily. If you've ever dove a non-balanced regulator to the depth, it sucks. It really does. The first time I dove a non-balanced regulator was in a current. I was in a heavy current diving fire hole, and I got behind the second wall to catch my breath, and I couldn't catch my breath because the regulator couldn't keep up with me. I felt like I was sucking through a straw. It was really bad. That was the last time I dove a non-balanced regulator as well. It's just definitely a good idea. A nice balanced regulator makes breathing easier, more comfortable, and makes your dives more enjoyable. Other key pieces of the regulators, a lot of them will have a Venturi valve on it. Pull it back towards you for dive mode, push it away from you for pre-dive mode. What that does is it literally puts a spring, a wire over the second stage diaphragm to make it harder to go to free flow. You can certainly breathe off it in pre-dive mode. And I'll be honest, there's a lot of times I forget to flip mine into dive mode, and I dive it in pre-dive mode. It doesn't really affect me that much. But if you open it up, it breathes more easily. Then other key pieces as well, which you'll find is this is an MTX-RC, in case you're wondering. This is not the R version. Nikki has the RCs. I have the Rs. But they also have an adjustment knob on one side, and those are wonderful to be able to allow more gas into your regulators, into your lungs as well. So definitely key things as you got to go through this. One of the cool things, most regulators today are built with what we call Rule 40. What that means to you is just about every regulator out of the box is going to be pre-built for nitrox, up to 40%. Why is that important, Megan?
Picking on Megan.
So that because you have to, it's got to be, it's just like your tanks, like they've got to be clean and be able to, I don't know, use nitrox versus ones that are not clean. I remember reading something about making sure they were designed for that.
The tank is hydrocarbons, and when hydrocarbons are put under pressure with they can explode and cause fire. Right. The other part of this though is the rings within them. They'll be replaced with a nitrogen-sensitive ring, which the ring is more durable against high partial pressures of oxygen. High partial pressure of oxygen, pure oxygen, can have an oxidizing effect and cause additional wear and tear against O-rings and rubber pieces that most times you don't consider. So having a regulator that has the proper rings in it so it doesn't wear out and break in the middle of a dive is probably not a bad thing, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. So
I'm not that question right, because that's what I was thinking. It was about the O-rings, and that would be more susceptible or resistant to oxygen. So
absolutely. The other thing to be aware of is when you start moving into that bigger diving, Adam, with me, and you want to start doing deco diving, the challenge is now you have to go get, for your deco bottle, you have to go get a different regulator that's rated for higher percentage of oxygen. So my primary regulators for my first deco bottles are rated up to 80%. So it's a whole different regulator that's rated up to 80%. And anything past that, I'm actually having one of my regulators rebuilt so it'll handle 100% as well. So I don't have to rent 100% reg when I go wherever I'm going. But you have to have them built for the gas that you're going to use past whatever. So you can't just grab a regulator, an F8 out of the box and say, oh, I'm going to run 60% on this. It doesn't work that way.
My question to you is, why don't they build all the regulators? Because the O-rings can't cost that much more for for 100% or 80% over just a regular O-ring. Is it?
It definitely is more cost, and it's overall. But that's an excellent question that I don't have a full answer to be honest.
Oh, it just stumped you.
You did. There you go. Put it down. Overall, my understanding is it's an overbuild that doesn't need to happen, and so they're always working to keep their margins close. But that's an excellent question. Why they don't just build all of them to 100%? I will. I know who to ask on that though.
Now, say again, on those regulators pointed towards you is pre-dive or away from you?
Away from you is pre-dive.
Okay.
Towards you is dive. Typically, I have yet to see one that's not that way. So certainly, check the manufacturer's recommendation on that for the regulator that you're using.
I need to see this because that makes no sense to me. I don't understand away and be. So you're talking about the mouthpiece, or you're talking about the adjustment valve?
There's a lever, and let's go back over to this.
I think Megan has a lever. I don't have a lever.
You have my regulator, babe.
So if you look right here, see this thing right here, Adam? Hey, Nikki.
Yeah.
Nick.
I never noticed that mine had a lever like that. I feel like it just had a flow, but maybe that's what it's for.
In fact, if you give me a minute, I will go get one. Give me a second.
Adam, I think my regulator is out right on top of the boxes, isn't it?
Right here, baby. You can't see me, but I'm right here.
Yeah.
So yeah, yours, it has the like away from you. Yeah, I guess it does. So towards you is dive and away from you is not.
Yeah, away from you is pre-dive.
I didn't realize.
There we go.
See, yours doesn't even have the adjustment. Like
mine doesn't have the adjustment. It just has the
plus.
It has the pre-dive and
I just happen to have a reg set.
So you're talking this one, right? One at minus and plus.
Yep, that's your pre-dive. That's your Venturi valve.
Okay. Well, it just has a minus and plus. I just thought that was designed to make easier breathing, and essentially, it's what it is.
Yep. So as you look at it on this side right here, that's back over here. There we go. So as you look at it on the side of the regulator, we've got this Venturi valve right here. So right now it's in pre-dive. Flip it over here. That's now dive mode. But you notice we also have this adjustment knob on the side.
So Ben, I just barely found out about that.
Oh.
Like I thought that the Venturi valve that you were talking about was the air adjustment, and that's the only thing I've been doing as far as playing with that when I'm diving.
No, you should be able to
I
twist
didn't
this
even
a lot.
realize there was a knob on there until like how long ago was that, Meg? Like
when we were in Fiji.
When we were in Fiji, I learned about that knob.
Yep. So you have that. That's what that little knob is for, to give you more air. So generally turning it toward you from at the top is going to be more gas. Turning it away from you is going to be less gas, typically. But make sure to look at it, and they should have a little plus minus on there for you as well. But that lever is your Venturi.
You have the Venturi valve, but you don't have an adjustment valve, baby.
Yep, I've got an extra 200 LX I have yet to figure out what I want to do with yet.
A what?
Well, this has been sitting in my basement on my workbench for 6 months.
Oh.
I have yet to figure out what I'm going to do with it. I've got an extra reg set down there. So you start collecting stuff. That's for sure. So that's what that's for.
Now I know. Well, I mean, I kind of knew, but now I'm knowing that that's what it's for is pre-dive and dive. So
absolutely. So another thing that happens, we dive cold water. So I talk a lot of cold water is regular icing, external icing, and internal icing. Now, internal icing is pretty rare. Luckily, most of these regulators that we're diving, especially if they're designed for cold water, are going to be environmentally sealed, right? That's what that little soft cap is. It's an environmental seal, so water can't get into this, into any of the action and cause problems, right? So that's what that's for. But one of the things we have to deal with is as gas compresses in, as we fill those tanks, what happens to the gas? Does it get warmer or colder, Meg?
Warmer.
Absolutely. What happens when it decompresses?
Colder.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we breathe that air, that's coming out of our cylinder from 3,000 psi being dropped down to 140 psi intermediate pressure by our first stage and into that hose, and we breathe it off. It's coming out about 20 to 30 degrees colder than the ambient temperature around us. So we need to be aware of that. So especially we're out, the air temperature is 30 degrees, the water temperature is 35 degrees. That means the air that's coming out of that, if the air temperature is 30, that it's coming out at 10 degrees. So if there's any kind of moisture at all, there's a good chance that we could get a freeze up. It's one of the reasons that when we're in cold, we don't want to take our regulators out and breathe them a ton on the surface, especially the colder it is, the less you want to do that. What we're doing is we're actually running a ton of moisture into the first stage or second stage and into the first stage, and we're going to cause it to free flow and freeze to the open. Luckily, these are designed to freeze the open. So that's what happens when regular ice happens, is that there's a little bit of moisture gets in the first stage. It's coming out cold and it freezes. It's one of the reasons. So when I teach how to launch the SMB, I don't have you take apart your gear underwater. I don't want you taking the regulator out of your mouth. And to fill this up, what I have you do is, as you're breathing along, this is my technique for this because I dive a lot of cold water, is as I'm breathing, there's gas coming out the vent, right? If I take this regulator out of my mouth and I hold my breath, what happens to my buoyancy?
You go up.
Yeah, absolutely. But if I keep breathing normally, what happens to my buoyancy?
Stays the same.
Yeah, I stay the same. So what would happen if I just opened up the bottom of my SMB, I turned my head sideways, and I allowed the gas, the bubbles that are coming out of my regulator, to just flow up into my SMB?
As long as you have an opened SMB that opens like that.
Absolutely. That would definitely be a huge key. One of the things I encourage is getting the right kind of SMB as well. All our SMBs do that. But making sure to have an SMB that you can open up that way. That way you can maintain your trim and your buoyancy, and you're not taking anything out of your mouth for safety. You're not breaking any equipment apart. It's not a big deal. You can just sit there, and it takes a little bit longer, but you have less chance of a freezing as well. So definitely something to be aware of.
I like that. I like that method anyway. It doesn't work with my SMB, which means I need to buy a new SMB anyway. But I do like that type of method. So
there you go. Well, luckily we have them at Idaho Dive Parts. Your local friendly. I'm just kidding. The next piece of gear that I really, really love is called a FFM, full face mask. I can tell you from personal experience, the advantage to a full face mask is that it is substantially warmer. So this is a picture coming out of the river. This is the day after Christmas at the river downtown under Johns Hole Bridge. Water temperature was 29 to 30 degrees. I'm in my dry suit, good undergarments, but that FFM absolutely makes a huge difference. It's crazy how much warmer you'll stay with diving in FFM. They're wonderful. They have another advantage. They have a much wider field of view with them. Disadvantage is if you have a surface swim, they're a pain in the butt with a surface swim because you don't want to put them on until you get ready to drop, as well as you will go through more gas because you have a larger space to fill. So typically my gas consumption goes up by about 5%, 10% at most with an FFM, but it goes up. So it definitely is something to be aware of. And just so you know, with redundancy, as you notice, I've got a computer on my wrist here. I've got a computer on my wrist over here. And if you look right there, that's an SPG. So I'm diving twin sets. So I definitely dive a redundant system with twin sets. Also, if you look over my shoulder, I do have a safety second over my shoulder if something were to happen as well. So FFM's amazing. And a personal story from that, last year I taught 4 ice sessions. I averaged about 2 hours of bottom time during each ice session. And I don't think I could have done that without an FFM. Other cool things, you can get communication devices. Nikki and I have yet to actually try and make our communication devices work. We just haven't really worked out trying to get them to do what they're supposed to doing, but you can talk. And we have them, they're push to talk, but it's just not something we have wanted to try and master yet. We just got a really good deal on it. Other things to be aware of are your BC. There's a lot of different kinds of BCs out there. The material in construction is pretty straightforward. They're generally some sort of heavy canvas with a bladder inside, with a LP hose over your left shoulder and some sort of strapping around. Now, there's a couple different types of these to talk about. You guys are pretty much familiar with the jacket style, the one size fits all kind of deal. It straps around your waist with a big cummerbund. It just claps in there. It's all one big piece. Great. Super simple. The typical problem with those is buoyancy tends to be a little bit harder because of the way that they're built. They tend to force you to be in a more of an upright position, and you have to work to get them in the correct position for good trim. The next step up from that is called a backplate and wing. Honestly, it's the only thing Nikki and I dive when we dive single tank or twin sets. And what the difference is a backplate and wing consists of 3 parts: the webbing and straps, the backplate itself, and the wing itself. And the cool thing is if something happens and one of my straps breaks, it's just a single webbing strap. I get new webbing. I can put it on, no big deal. It goes right through my backplate, not a big deal. If I were to damage my backplate, I could get a new backplate, or if I wanted a lighter backplate or a different backplate, I could add that, but I still have the wing and the straps. If I didn't have a big enough wing, or I needed a smaller wing, or a wing for twin sets, I could change that out. So with one backplate and web harness, I could put a wing on there for twin sets, or I can put a wing on there for single tank as well. The other cool thing is because you're building a set of straps, and I'm going to look back over to the visual of this. Here we go. A back plate. You have this big wing and it's directly on your back. The nice part about that is buoyancy is a lot easier to work with. It forces you to be in a more diver-esque position as well. And they're super simple to use. Literally, you set this wing on top of the back plate, and if you're running twin sets, there's a screw that goes through the tanks themselves, and you screw it on. If you're using a single tank wing, you can see right here, that's where your tank bands go through. And there's 2 sets of them. There's tank bands here and a set of tank bands here. You slide those through, and it's pieced together and it's modular. It's very easy to work with, and it doesn't take a tremendous amount. They want us to talk a little bit about integrated and non-integrated weight systems. You can absolutely, if you're having challenges, weight belts. The problem, Adam, in my opinion, is weight belts are not designed for older men. Because the problem is, I don't know about you, but I inherited this rare Indian disease. Megan, have you heard of the rare Indian disease older guys get?
No hips or butts?
No ass at all.
Yeah.
So that's the problem. It works great for as women get a little bit older because they have hips. They'll keep those things on, but I can't keep a weight belt on. I unfortunately am not designed that way, but there definitely are some advantages to them. They're quick, they're easy. If you need to ditch your weight, you just reach down, grab that buckle, and boom, it is gone. I tend to prefer integrated weight systems, and honestly, at this point, I don't dive weight systems. My setup with what I do is my weight system. So as we look at things like a backplate and wing, this is a stainless steel backplate. That backplate by itself is 7 pounds. So I don't tend to have additional weights unless I'm diving a single tank, and then I put weight pockets on for integrated. So definitely a different way to go as well. All right, continuing down this cavalcade value, you have your information system we kind of talked about. This is the Apex DSX, just to give you an idea. And as you start moving up into more advanced computers, they start doing more advanced and cool things. One of the things I do like about the DSX is it also gives you your gradient factor. And what the gradient factor is it tells you how fast you are off gassing. Green is good, yellow is slow down on your ascent, red is stop, descend a little bit if you need to. So it starts giving you a little bit more advanced features like gradient factors, surface gradient factor, tissue maps as well, that you can start going through and having a better understanding. It'll also give you things like your partial pressure of your gas that you're currently on in a more clear fashion. And again, this one's set up for apparently 1845 is a popular trimix gas, because that's what they're telling you is this is an 1845 gas overall. And we went through the history of computers, so I think we're pretty good on that. Other cool things that you definitely need to make sure, your SPG, that's one of the cool things with an AI, an air integrated dive computer like the DSX, for example, is it has an SPG with a pod. So it's giving you your tank pressure right there. A lot of times on bigger dives, I like to have a steam gauge style as well as a backup. I've definitely had that issue and the need for it as well, and I've been thankful I've had it. A timing device. Most of the new dive computers, like yours, Adam, have a compass on them as well, and they have wonderful digital gauges. But you want to make sure you have some way to time your dive. Now, Adam, you and Megan are out for a dive, and all of a sudden, you're at 90 feet. You've been there for 15 minutes. Your computer dies. What do you do?
There's a lot. For example, I can help with games,
Computer,
relaxation,
stop.
education,
Computer.
and more.
Computer, stop. My Alexa responds to computer, unfortunately. So there's a lot you do. But Adam, you and Megan are diving 90 feet, 15 minutes. What do you do when your computer dies?
When my computer died? We signed to each other that your computer doesn't work, and then we slowly start ascending together to our safety stop, and we kind of watch our depths, and I kind of rely on her to guide me if I don't have a secondary computer.
Absolutely. You're in this case, your emergency gas and your emergency computer has lipstick and it's pretty. So and has feelings. So that's one of the cool things you can do. And be aware that if something were to happen, go to your dive buddy. Computer is broken. We need to ascend, right? And make sure you have hand and arm signals for that. One of the cool things that I love at diving with Nikki is Nikki and I have a pretty broad vocabulary for diving along. We have broken, right, is one of our symbols. We also have gotta pee as another symbol. Most things are necessary. But as you go along, be aware that you can absolutely do that and that it's absolutely permissible, right?
Me and Megan sign to each other. We don't always understand everything because we get too in depth with our conversations in underwater because we have sign language behind us a little bit.
Nice. That's awesome.
Because my daughter, she's deaf, so she signs. So we both sign.
That is awesome. I love it. One of the other cool things with dive computers is they're adaptive, right? They'll take into account the idea of the time you don't spend at depth, and they'll also give you a more accurate time for your surface interval and for your second and repetitive dives as well. They have an adaptive algorithm based upon that idea. You can also program in multiple gases. So if on dive 1 you had a 28% blend and dive 2 you had a 32% blend, you can program that in more easily. Most new computers out there have a free diving mode out there. Why anybody in their right mind would want to go free diving, I don't know. That's beyond me. So I kind of passed by that one. I have used mine in free dive mode, but not intentionally. They also have a gauge mode. I accidentally engaged mine in gauge mode the other day where it won't keep monitoring the residual nitrogen for multiple dives, and it doesn't monitor the amount of gas. Most of our computers are all at this point hoseless connections, so they're definitely pretty awesome because they have these pods, and most of these are designed with pods. By the way, that's the ratio. This is the Apex DSX, Aqualung 550, Aqualung 770, and the Asunto D5. I'm impressed that I know all that, to be honest with you. Other cool things that I like is a lot of the new computers have also a remaining bottom time, RBT, on them, and on the gas integrated computers. And after a period of time, it'll figure out how much gas you have, how fast you're going through gas, and how deep you are, and it'll give you a basic idea of how much more time you can spend before you run out of gas. Remaining bottom time is definitely a cool way to go as well. And it'll recalculate as you get shallower as well. So if you're 90 feet, it says you have 5 minutes of gas left, and you ascend to 30 feet, you'll notice that that time to empty, your remaining bottom time will increase dramatically, right? Because you'll be able to go through that a little as well. Other cool things, most of them have PC software, so you can go in and look at everything online. I really, really love that, and I'm very, very big on going back into my dives and looking at them, and then utilizing that data in a real and meaningful way. I think it's extremely handy to be able to do, to give you an idea. Some of the stuff that I look at, give me a second here, I will show you. Let's see. Whoop, where'd it go? Subsurface. There you are. Give me a second. Macintosh is being ornery today. I'm buying a new dock for it. It's being weird. Here we go. And there we go. Okay, finally it did what I wanted to do. So let's see. Now let's share that. Okay. All right, good. I didn't lose you guys. Okay, so unshare, stop sharing screen, share screen again. Window, subsurface. There we go. Okay, so this is for a new computer that I'm working with, but one of the cool things is here's the actual dive that I was on. And you can see this is my depth markers, my gas pressure, my temperature. This gives me my my tissue saturation points. It also gives, here's the tank. I was using that was actually an HP 100. There we go. So I was using an HP 100 to give me information. For example, my sac rate on this was off the chart at 19.3 liters per minute. I had a 53-minute dive. I consumed 1,916 liters of gas. And it also gives you my CNS. Here's my altitude. I was in fresh water. Water temperature was 41.5 degrees. So it's nice to be able to go back. I use it like a pilot log, and in terms of how I use things and what I'm looking for. So I'm able to go through and say, okay, here's what I'm doing. This was a 2-tank dive, so you can see the gas on both dives, and this was in Yellowstone. But it's kind of fun to go back and measure that information on the computer and utilize that in a really meaningful way.
That's really cool. Which computer was that one?
That was for my ratio. I was testing out the ratio this weekend, and that's the subsurface app that I actually use quite a bit. It's just I've just now started putting dives into the subsurface. Other ones that look like, let's see, Garmin. I'll log into Garmin. I'll show you what my Garmin looks like. I have Sunto on here. I don't know where it's at. I don't log it onto my computer very often.
I have the Sunto app on my phone and stuff, so we're familiar with that. But
Awesome.
Megan's got hers on her phone for her app too.
Here we go. And then, in case you're wondering here's what the...
So now my question is does your app calculate the same kind of information for the DSX?
It does. It's very good. It's not quite as in depth as what I just showed you, but it's definitely very awesome. It gives a lot of great information.
Is it more than,
this is what it looks like from my from the Garmin. There's my GPS coordinates. This particular one didn't show where I exited, but here's my tank pressure for my left tank. There's my tank pressure for my right tank. I can also go in and say, okay, overlay right and left tank. So there's both my tanks because I'm diving 2 different tanks on that as well. And then you can go with, here's my depth profile. That red means that I was in decompression as well. The water temperature was 50 degrees with the minimum water temperature 42 degrees that we hit. I was diving 5,700 foot elevation. My average depth is 44 feet. And so total dives, I've got 291 hours on this dive computer. And this dive was 1 hour and 34 minutes. My nitrogen load was 69% upon leaving, and my CNS was 16%. So a lot of really great information that you can go through and dig into. Definitely a lot of fun to look at and give a better understanding of what's actually happening and what's going on. There's my depth profile. There's my deco. So you can see everything with that. So kind of fun. But use that information and monitor it and log it. It's definitely to your advantage to keep up with all the key information from your dive. Make sense?
Yeah.
Other cool things that you guys want to be to use, flags and floats. I've got a couple. In lakes, I tend not to use flags and floats, and here's why. I tend to find that the water skiers like them because they want to use them as marking points and ski over them. So other examples, when we go out to Yellowstone, a lot of times I will take a flag out to the spire. I'll tie it off next to the spire. And I've watched more than one boat drive right over to the buoy to my dive flag and touch it and play with it and try to figure out, what is that? Why is there a red and white flag out there? So in lakes and rivers, I tend not to use one because I don't like to be a target, but in open water, I think it's a really good idea. Other good things to have, some sort of signaling device. I love that everybody wants to have a whistle. I thought I had one. Yes, I do. Everybody wants to have a whistle on their SMB. And this is a really nice aluminum one. It's very loud, but I'm pretty sure that this helicopter flying over top of me is not going to hear this. So having some sort of other way to signal, some sort of reflective surface is definitely not a bad idea. You guys have dove with me before, and you've heard me. I keep a D-ring that I can get to pretty easily, and I do the taps. So that's how I use my underwater marking device. We pretty much have a good idea what signal marker buoys are, as well as reels. A cutting device, I just can't speak highly enough of having a good cutting device. On all my deco dives, I carry a slate, something I can write on if I needed to, that I can tie it to my SMB and send it up, or I can write a slate to Nikki, or I can take notes. But I also put my whole dive plan on a slate on my wrist, so I can remember that. I know I don't have the bandwidth while I'm diving to remember a complex dive plan. Other things, make sure you're testing your gear once in a while. Pull that SMB out once in a while and make sure it works. And if you're gonna, and make sure you're using it, and make sure that we're aware that we can only repair something so much, right? Especially at SMB. We don't, when we get to that point where they start becoming a Franken BC, it's probably time to just get a new BC. And I see a lot of people try and piece and part them together and try and make them. You're asking for problems. Other big things, I always encourage strongly have a good save a dive kit. In mine, I have a small pair of channel locks. I can't tell you how stupid handy they are. I always have a band of zip ties. And those are probably the two biggest things. I have a lighter and a small blowtorch. Those have been the biggest things overall by far, and then an Allen wrench set. But most of the things in a Saiba dive kit, you can put in a little bag. You can go down to Harbor Freight and spend probably $40 and have a pretty kick butt Saiba dive kit. Also, a good selection of O-rings is definitely to your advantage as well. Nobody wants to lose a dive that they've paid $10,000 to get out to Fiji for because they didn't remember a 29-cent O-ring, right? So O-rings, definitely huge. I can't tell you how many times I've used those stupid zip ties, though. I always carry a spare mouthpiece in my Save It Dive kit as well. Brett and Ashley have a batch of them. They're like the super cheap ones, and I think they're like $6 or $8. They're the bite guard style. I really like them. So I keep a couple of extra mouthpieces in case mine tears. So little dumb things. Think about what could tear, what could break, what could happen. I keep some extra plugs and an extra hose, and I generally keep an extra SPG in my Save It Dive kit as well. So a few extra little baubles and bits definitely go a long way. Well, there we go, guys. What questions do you have over gear and equipment? We are in the home stretch at this point, by the way.
I think we're pretty good on that part.
Awesome. All right. Well, let's just jump into a little bit of waves, tides, and currents. And then we'll go into a little bit about the animals. And then we'll go into a question and answer session. Whoop, that's not what I wanted. Sorry. I didn't want to see you again. Just kidding. I'm just kidding. All right. So waves, tides, and motions. Water in motion is really something we have to be very concerned about. It's definitely a big deal. And it's even tougher in lakes as well. So currents, longshore currents, rip currents, waves, and tides. And so I pulled up some really interesting things. So a longshore current, just like it says here, is when a wave hits a beach, it releases a burst of energy that generates a current. These longshore currents run parallel to the shore, which makes them more dangerous. Different from rip current that pulls you out to sea, a longshore current pulls you along a parallel to the shore, but they can be strong enough that you may have trouble getting out of the current. I've absolutely swam through a longshore current to save somebody, and it's definitely scary. It keeps pulling you down and pulling you out the beach, and it makes it hard to get back into the beach as well. So they're longshore, they're parallel to the beach as we look at them. The other one we hear a lot about is the rip current. So rip currents are channelized currents of water flowing away from the shore at the surf beaches, right? So it could be rip current or rip tide. It's the same thing. It's pulling the water away from the shore. Rip currents typically form breaks into sandbars and also structures such as near jetties and piers as well. And they're commonly found on all surf beaches, including Great Lakes beaches as well. They're very dangerous because they pull people away from shore. The rip current speeds can vary from moment to moment and can quickly increase and become more dangerous to anyone entering the surf. So be very aware of these. They're definitely things to be concerned about and to keep an eye on. How you escape them is you start swimming parallel to shore to get out of them overall. As we start dealing with waves, it's interesting to kind of talk about the waves and the wave lengths and heights. So here's the problem, Adam. Where do you think a wave is taller? At the backside of the wave or in front of the wave?
To be honest, I don't know. Where is it tallest?
Yeah, for you. Where are you going to get the most action in front from the wave? Where is it going to hit you the hardest? So it's going to be taller at the backside of the wave or the front side of the wave?
I would think the wave coming into you is depending on what state of the wave is, but it comes into you and then you kind of get up and you flow down with it. So the front, I guess.
So generally, the wave is going to be 1.5 times taller than the actual measured wave height. So the way they measure is from the wave is from the backside of the trough to the top of the wave. So if you see a thing that says we have 3-foot waves today, if you try and walk into a 3-foot wave, you're actually walking into a 5.5-foot wave. So as you're trying to get into the ocean, you're 4.5 to 5.5 foot of wave is going to be hitting you. So when they say we got 3-foot waves, we definitely need to be aware of that there's something happening here. The other thing we talk about is not just the wave height, but the wave length. And the wave length is measured from the top of each crest, right? And so that when we start talking about frequency, if it may have a 60-second wavelength. That means there's 1 minute between waves. And that's a pretty fast wave, to be honest with you. And most lakes, typically, the wavelength, especially in a heavy wind day, is more like 30 seconds. The wavelength is literally every 30 seconds hitting you. Typically in the ocean, you're going to see wavelengths of 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes. As you start seeing that wavelength get shorter, you know that they're coming in faster and faster. And there's a lot more wind to be aware of. So we had an issue the week. Let's see, this was not last weekend, not the weekend before last, weekend before that. We were at Bear Lake and there was a heavy wind. Wind gusts were 25 miles an hour, and we had 2.5 to 3 foot waves as we tried to get in. What we ended up doing is we do what I lovingly call the Navy SEAL entry, especially when you start talking side mount. And the way a Navy SEAL entry works is you get into the water where you can kneel down in it, where you get the water to right about your waist when you kneel, just below your waist, but you're kneeling and you have some control. And even at that point, it's enough that when the waves hit you, it will absolutely knock you over. And you get yourself geared up, get your tanks ready, get everything clipped, and at that point, you turn, face the wave, you lay on your belly, and you crawl your way through. And once the wave hits, you stop. When the waves are going back out, you crawl. And when the wave hits again and pushes you back, you stop, and you crawl your way through it. But it's pretty dangerous. You got to be very careful. And the exit is pretty much the same when it comes to something like that, as you literally swim until the point where you can do a slight light push-up, and this is in lakes, not in the ocean, where you can do a push-up and you can stick your head out, and then you crawl 2 or 3 more feet so you can get out of the water so you can breathe and you're safe. So you got to be very careful. Waves will definitely cause issues that you don't want to be a part of. Now, as you get ready, if you're doing an ocean entry and you've got those nice 2 to 3 foot waves, what you want to make sure you're doing is you're walking sideways towards the wave. So if you guys are the wave, I'm not going to walk this direction. I'm going to turn because I want to be as minimized profile as I possibly can. I'm going to link arms with my buddy so that we're safe, but we want to make sure we have that shoulder. And when we see the wave get ready to come down, we want to call it wave coming. We're going to duck. We're going to lean forward towards it, and we're going to come up through it. right? We don't want to walk towards the wave. We don't want to back up towards the wave. We want to be a blade of grass. And like I said, when we see that wave getting ready to hit us, we're going to drop our knees, we're going to drop our shoulder forward, and we're going to push into it like we're tackling a tackling belly. I'm sorry, Lucy. There we go. So that's how we do it. And we want to make sure we're safe. First thing, and when we get out, we want to get to about waist deep of water, put our fins on, make sure we're turning towards the waves so that we're safe. Be very careful. So, oh my. The next piece of that is we have something called tide. Now, typically, before you go to doing a shore entry, you want to find out about that particular shore entry. You want to find out the best time to enter that site. Typically,
low tide.
Yeah, typically you want to go in about an hour before high tide, and you want to try and exit about an hour after high tide. That gives you 2 full hours of diving. But it's going to be as the high tide comes in and as it's coming out. If you go in right at high tide, that only gives you about 45 minutes of an hour to an hour of dive time before you have to get out, before you're going to be being pulled back out, and it's going to become dangerous. The interesting thing with tides is they're controlled by the moon. And I love this visual, because this is what's happening. The moon is actually pulling the oceans away from the earth. And at high tide, the moon is going to be the highest above it, and it's pulling the ocean away from the earth. They call that the sublunar portion of the tide, so that we have high tide. The low tide is going to be when the moon is either halfway away or 100% away, and it can slosh away. So this is actually what's happening with the oceans, is they're actually not perfectly round, but they're being pulled and pushed away from the earth by the moon. And so we have our sublunar and our antipolar. Our sublunar is going to be the highest portion of our high tide, and the antilunar is going to be the lowest portion of our high tide, because it's being pushed. Kind of interesting way to visualize this. Do you guys like this?
Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, definitely an interesting way to be. Typically, tides take about 10 hours, 10 to 12 hours to go from high tide to low tide. Now, really cool. For example, Nikki and I went to Hawaii last year for 2 weeks, and we found all our cool dive sites that we wanted to go dive. And what we did is we found a really sweet app, and it'll take me a second to find it. Here we go. We found the first one called Solar Watch. And the cool thing with Solar Watch is it gave us all the times for, yes, I'm enjoying this app. Thank you very much. For the civil, nautical, and astrological sunrise and sunset. And then we also had the tide guide. Thank you very much. I've got a new version of this. Thank you. Thank you. There we go. And there's our tide guide. Let's see if I can
That's cool.
And so it's kind of nice in that you can pull through it, and it'll give you, there we go. It'll give you the times of the high tide and the amount of height to it. So, for example, we got low high tide and high tide, 2.5 feet to 3.1 feet, right, in this particular location. This is in West Palm right now. So this is the high tide. So it's kind of nice to be able to have that information. And these apps are free. So as you get ready to go out and do your dives, make sure you know when high tide is. Make sure you know when low tide is, because typically you want to be in the water an hour prior to high tide, which means you need to be at the beach at least an hour prior to that, because it's going to take you that long to get ready and go. And typically, if it's a big diving beach, you'll want to get there 2 hours to 3 hours before high tide, because then you can find a parking space. So a little pro tip for you there. Absolutely.
I thought it was pretty cool when we were in Fiji and experiencing the tide, because I never really experienced it before that. So a little bit, but not much.
When we lived in South Carolina, we had a house on the water with a dock, and high tide, low tide, literally we had about 7 to 8 feet of difference. It was awesome. We used to go shrimping at high tide, so it was definitely a lot of fun. Let's see, we talked about that. Let's see. Right. All right. So marine animals and injuries. And so one of the things that happens to divers is they get stupid. They decide that they need to touch everything. They want to collect everything, and they want to molest things. So they find cool things, and they're like, I have to touch that. Look, it's got spikes. I should touch it. So I bought this. Just, I didn't find it. I actually purchased it. But a very cool shell, right? But we got to be aware, if it's got spikes, it's probably doesn't want to be picked up.
Mm-hmm.
Oddly enough, one of the most dangerous animals out there is the conch. The conch has a really nice, cool, poisonous spike. You have to be very careful of that. Other things, we were on a dive in Hawaii, Nikki and I, and the dive master had the brilliant idea to put his hand on the coral in front of a hole that just happened to have a dragon eel in it. And the dragon eel reached out, gave him a really lovely kiss reminder that we don't put our hand in front of wildlife. And he had the opportunity to get 4 or 5 stitches. So most injuries are because of divers' inattention, aggressiveness, or just lack of consideration overall, or not lack of control. That's the number one way people get into fire coral, for example. They don't pay attention. They don't realize, oh, wait a minute, that coral over there may not be the best thing to rub against for an itch, right? But it happens, right? Other things out there, stingrays, we all know what happened to Steve Irwin out there. If you see a shark hiding in a hole, it's probably not the best idea to grab its tail and pull it out of the hole. Just saying, kind of maybe a pro tip out there. I was talking to Stephen Kajura about that. I asked him, I says, is there a recorded incident of a nurse shark biting somebody? He says, absolutely. He says they're real tame and docile, and they'll hide in holes, and people will get bummed by that, and so they'll grab them by the tail and try and pull them out. And then are surprised when the nurse shark turns around and bites them. So the shark by its tail, it doesn't like that. So that's a typical what happens.
I mean, they're just sea puppies. I mean, if you yank on a dog's tail, he's gonna bite you.
Absolutely. I think if you get done Lucy's tail enough, she'd probably turn around and bite you at some point. She says no, but I don't believe that. I think at some point she would bite. I've never seen her bite anybody yet, but overall, just be aware. So the first aid and treatment for this is pretty straightforward. The first thing we got to do is most injuries to from sea life are going to be some sort of cut, scrape, abrasion, or a bite mark, right? So we need to end our dive at that point. Head up, we're ending our dive. And if you guys notice, I try and be really good about giving you the hand arm signals as I go along. This means end dive right now. There's a reason because everybody's getting out of the water. So if you get bit by a shark, you get stung by a stingray, we're going to get to surface immediately. We're going to treat for shock. We're going to clean the wound immediately. Clean fresh water and antibiotics. If we're bleeding, we're going to go ahead and treat for the bleeds as well, just like we all learned in stress and rescue and reactor, right? Other places we can definitely get injuries are caused by the environment. I consider sea urchins part of the environment, to be honest with you. We had an incident. Nikki and I were doing a shore dive in the ocean, and we went in this really beautiful cove. Oh, it was amazing. Just absolutely warm, sunny day, 75 degrees. Water temp was at a wonderful 76 degrees. Palm trees, the works. We went in, did a 3-hour dive. We came. The problem is we got ready to get in the dive. Nikki got into the bag, and she says, "Where's my boots?" I said, "They're in the bag." She says, "No, I took them out to let them dry by the window last night at the hotel." Oh, yeah, I remember seeing them. I didn't pick them up, so she had no boots for her dive. So she decided to try to use flip-flops because her idiot husband had left her boots back at the hotel room, and the hotel room was an hour and a half away, and we would have missed our dive opportunity. So she wore flip-flops in her fins to make them fit, and that worked pretty good until her idiot husband navigated about 40 feet off from the entry point in this cove, and the tide was going out, and a lot more rocks were exposed. As she tried to walk along the rocks, her flip-flop got caught on something, bent, and she stepped on a sea urchin. Yeah, about a month ago, she finally got the last pointer out of it. That was about a year ago. So it definitely be aware. The way to treat that, hot water to help get those barbs out, clean fresh water and antibiotics to try and keep it from going into infection as well. Other things that are happen, I've definitely been whacked against the rocks a few times. Be aware, breaks and bruises absolutely happen. That gear is not light that you're wearing, so treat for the appropriate type of action that you're going to be dealing with. Other things to be aware of, punctures, sea urchins are my personal favorite. I've gotten hit by a sea urchin. Nikki's got hit by a sea urchin. I was doing a dive off the breakers off of Maui a few years ago at night, and we suddenly saw a 7-foot squid. I turned really quick. I happened to be doing some photos of a really cool sea urchin, and didn't see it, and got my hands into a sea urchin, so that hurt. Definitely conch shells and cone shells. Be aware that they do have a spike in there. They're definitely not your friend. Sea snakes will bite you. Octopus have a nice sharp beak that they can absolutely bite you as well. So just be aware. Sea animals don't like to be played with, and they're not there to be your best friends. Other things to be aware of: jellyfish. Definitely not your friend as well. It's one of the reasons I encourage strongly wearing a wetsuit to protect against those. Urban legend: don't pee on somebody that's gotten stung by a jellyfish. That is not a true thing. All you're asking to do is cause infection. Wash them off with clean, soapy water, and you can take a credit card and you can a lot of times scrape off a lot of the toxin and barbs that are stuck into them. But please don't pee on your friend. Megan, you can pee on Adam, but Adam don't pee on Megan. So just saying.
Oh my goodness.
All right, guys. That ends. We talked a lot about equipment today. We talked a ton about some sea life, simplicity. We talked about different types of gear that we can use and that comes up. We talked a lot about dive computers. Yesterday, we talked about deco theory as well. We talked about some dive maladies, got through that. Really got into safety stops, talked about the problems with doing deep stops. We talked about dive profiles. And the day before that, we talked about gases and how to do a lot of the math, which is oddly enough simpler than most people think. What questions do you guys have?
I think you got it. Like, you really did. I guess maybe just I think you even got most of the things figured out on the mathematics side of things too. Might review a little bit of that, but besides that, I think everything's been pretty good.
Awesome. Megan, what did you learn? What was something that was really interesting you learned, either tonight or in the last 2 nights?
Oh, learned a lot. Again, I think just the gas density and being aware of it was a huge thing for me.
It's a huge one. It's a surprisingly big one that needs to be talked about more. Not talked about nearly enough. That's for sure. And if you guys would like, I'm happy to send you the article that I wrote for Dan. It's published on their site as well. So
Yeah, for sure.
Need a cheat sheet for all the numbers though. Like that number that you told us we had to remember.
0.432, 0.445, or 455?
Yeah, I was gonna say that. 432 and 445.
455.
455. See, I even wrote it down wrong. What the heck's wrong with me?
And then the other one's 0.06894. That's your conversion from bar to PSI.
How often are we going to use that?
I actually use it a fair amount because I do my gas calculations. The good news is I wouldn't worry too much about that right this minute. But when we get out to do our dive guiding dive, we are going. I will bring some notebooks and pencils with us, and what we'll do is we're going to do a gas calculation ahead of time, and we'll go through that together in person. So I wouldn't sweat that one too much right now, but we will be using that 0.06894 at one point. Once you get it down a few times, it is completely invaluable. That's for sure.
And then 0.84, the 16,000 feet number that you use.
Here's the easiest math on that. By the way, guys, if you want to upgrade, or not an upgrade, but kind of refresher on altitude diving, I can send you a link to my last altitude class. You're welcome to watch that. Straightforward. The math for altitude is pretty simple. I've done the math and done some pretty simple calculations on that. For example, you are 3.5% deeper than you think you are for every 1,000 feet you gain.
That's definitely a class I want to take, because that doesn't, like, I still don't understand that part above like altitude stuff. But that's for another day. We definitely go into it.
When you're ready, I love teaching that class, and I'm very good at that one as well. I actually I've written some standards for some other agencies on that I can't really go into. So, but yeah, I'm pretty well known for my altitude class. So happy to help with that. Whatever you guys need. Once you guys finish your final exam, just to kind of put that out there, please let me know so I can, and I will probably, I'll try and do it tonight, but I'll probably do it Monday if you don't mind. I'll do your student records. But if you could have your final exam and all your mini tests and your pages looked at by Monday, and we'll get you certified off, and then let's schedule your first dive guide class.
Okay.
I'm already done with mine, so it's done.
Of course you are, Megan, because you're that gal. That's awesome.
I'm practically done. I don't think I have but like 5 pages left.
Cool. Megan, did you do the final exam too?
Yep.
Right on. How'd you do it?
She probably did it while we were doing class, is what she was doing.
I did not. I did it last night at like 11 o'clock. So bite me, babe.
I will.